Compassion fatigue affects many different people. It's a very real and difficult hardship that can complicate things in the workplace, especially if you're a nurse. On a daily basis, nurses care for several patients with preciseness and deep empathy. It can be hazardous if a nurse does not deal with compassion fatigue because it causes a person to lose sleep, become irritable, and any number of things. It can even cause a nurse to retire early. There's a lot to discuss about compassion fatigue, so I'll let my colleagues give you more information on compassion fatigue, some coping mechanisms to help you through it, and some very useful statistics.
Compassion fatigue is defined as a combination of physical, emotional, and spiritual depletion associated with caring for patients in significant emotional and physical pain. Nurses interact a lot with patients and their families, so therefore they deal with not only the medicine side of care, but also the emotional aspect. In a survey of 138 nurses, 86 of those working in the emergency department reported moderate to high levels of compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue does not mean that the staff is too tired to care. It is just a sense of despondency, which may lead to cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and physical symptoms. Symptoms associated with compassion fatigue can be anger, anxiety, depression, insomnia, poor judgment, things like that. This can cause bad performance with medication errors, unhappiness at jobs, and can ultimately affect the workplace.
Coping mechanisms are the strategies people often use in the face of stress and/or trauma to help manage painful or difficult emotions. Nursing is a physically, emotionally, and spiritually demanding profession. Dealing with ongoing elevated levels of stress can affect a nurse's health, individual performance, and career longevity. It's important to find healthy and effective coping mechanisms to handle the stressful demands of a nursing career. In a case study published by the Global Journal of Health Science, 18 nurses across 3 hospitals were interviewed and studied to identify the strategies they use to cope with the stress of their jobs. Findings indicate 6 main themes of coping mechanisms: situational control of conditions, seeking help, preventative monitoring of the situation, self-controlling, avoidance and escape, and spiritual coping. Finding a healthy way to cope with stress is important to avoiding burnout as a nurse. Some healthy coping mechanisms include support, relaxation, problem solving, humor, and physical activity. Maladaptive coping mechanisms like numbing, compulsions, and risk-taking, unhealthy self-soothing, isolation, and self-harm have dangerous consequences and should be avoided.
Working as a nurse causes much stress and anxiety. A study found that approximately 82% of emergency nurses had moderate to high levels of burnout, and 81% of the workers who suffer from compassion fatigue are women. This means that the majority of the nurses are struggling with some sort of stress that not only affects them mentally, but also physically. If nurses are unable to cope with these things, then it can lead to early retirement. Another study found that when confronted with workplace stress, 70% of nurses reported that they consume more junk food, and 63% reported that they consume more food than usual as a way of coping. Oftentimes, nurses cope with high levels of stress in ways that are not healthy for their body.
Compassion fatigue is a relevant crisis facing many nurses every day. Compassion fatigue has many consequences for nurses, their patients, and employers. A suffering nurse may experience many negative side effects that can harm the health of the nurse and the effectiveness of their care. This requires more deliberate attention from managers, educators, researchers, and nurses themselves. Increasing awareness of how to cope with job stress has the potential to influence both recruitment and retention of highly effective nurses and improve the care of patients everywhere.